Hey everyone, welcome back to Candid Conversations with your CPA. On today's episode, we have Marianne Cursetjee, founder of Alibi Cannabis. She has been working in the industry for some time now, has done a lot of stuff in accounting, finance, owning her own business, leading up to cannabis. Like everybody, she's got a story before cannabis. And then unfortunately was diagnosed with cancer. Through that journey has transitioned into the cannabis space, and so it's a really interesting story. So I'm excited to have Marianne on the show today. And so Marianne, I'll kick it over to you to introduce yourself formally.
Thanks, Raymond. I'm really excited to be here today. Yeah, you've basically put everything in a nutshell. So my background's accounting, finance. My degree is in accounting. I did finance at some really large Fortune 100 companies for a while, and really grew to understand how important it is to set up systems and processes so that you can identify ways to improve. And so I've taken that knowledge, and I about 20 years ago I started my own e-commerce company. So then also added e-commerce and SEO to my knowledge base. Had a nice exit from that, and then, like you said, I was diagnosed with cancer. And through my healing process from that, a friend gave me some cannabis and said, "Hey, why don't you try this? It might help." And it did, and it was perfect timing because Oregon had just legalized the recreational market, and we were able to buy some property, start a farm, and we've been growing in the licensed space since 2017.
Okay, 2017, and in cannabis, I mean, that's a lifetime. So you lived through
Yeah.
the Oregon markets, the ups and downs, and kind of just now even just the national market, seeing these new states come on board and go through similar cycles. It's almost a blessing having been around for so long, but that's awesome. And then I always like to hit on the professional background of my guests. I always find it very fascinating, because there is so much overlap, and it's just everybody has a story before cannabis. And I would say that stuff that we learn in traditional industry is usually directly applicable to the cannabis industry, within reason. I always say there's for sure nuances of working in an industry that's federally illegal, just at the surface, everybody knows about, but then there's also just all these below the level stuff that you got to deal with being in a startup industry or one that's expanding into new markets. So no, I want to touch on that a little bit today about just the day-to-day of running a cannabis company. And so you guys are in the cultivation vertical. I believe it's indoor cultivation, correct?
Yes.
And then you have just recently started also doing pre-rolls and kind of on the manufacturing processing side, or at least selling the pre-rolls. So with that in mind, kind of you're a founder in the cannabis industry, you're a leader. What core values or principles have been instrumental in shaping your philosophy around leadership? And can you just share any instances where your leadership mentality guided your decision making?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question because it's really easy when you look at creating a team. It's easy to focus on specific tasks. So, like for example, you may need somebody who has a specific knowledge in, say, since we're on the cultivation side, I might need somebody who knows, is a really good grower. But also, we need to think about the soft skills and what philosophy we want to have as a team. And I think in cannabis that's even more important because things move so quickly that if you don't have a good team who is agile and willing to change, that you'll just get left behind. And so we've found that over time, since we've been in business for so long, we've had to make some staff changes and have to make some changes in the team and the way that we function. And it's always a choice towards being humble and being willing to learn and embracing change. And those are not easy things to teach.
No, for sure. And that's kind of even like soft skills. They're hard to teach, but they are definitely teachable. And so like anything, you want to hire somebody with a good portion of soft skills so you don't have to do too much teaching. But it's the same as hard skills. You can teach people to work within the cultivation facility to do specific tasks, but I think we can also coach people up or teach our staff on how to communicate better, whether it's consistency or response rate, all that good stuff, and just listening skills. You can go down the list of soft skills that are important. And then just the being a leader, and then the changes that are happening in the cannabis industry, just thinking through just like that industry is dynamic, it's always changing. So kind of giving that you have a team that you need to lead And so when changes need to be made, how have you been able to navigate that? How do you explain that to your team just and help them always stay dynamic and agile in this industry?
Well, I think the first thing is to role model that, the behavior that we want. So I'm always willing to accept feedback. It's like we're not like asking everybody to constantly criticize each other, but if there's a way that I could do things better, I would hope that my peers would tell me that. I have we've assembled a good team with a lot of trust. And so by being able to model the idea of always wanting to get better, and it's not a personal thing. I mean, so, just this week we've had to make some changes to our genetics, and it's not at the farm, and it's not like there's nothing that anybody messed up, but we've got to be careful and do things in a respectful way. But it's not about the people, it's about the process. So what's the process that we're going to, how do we identify what genetics we want to keep and which ones we don't? It's not what each individual person likes, it's what's best for the business. And so we use data, and we provide feedback kindly, and we have a process. And that way everybody knows what the rules are. What game you're playing, and there shouldn't be any surprises.
No, I would agree. And that's an interesting take of process over people, because we live that world with like accounting and financial SOPs. It's like, I can't say Joe has to do this every month. I have to say, no, your purchasing manager has to do this every month, because Joe might leave. So yeah. I need this process to be documented, so that when the new Joe comes in, he knows how to be a procurement manager. How do you guys, and then just being that it is cannabis and we're dealing with a living product with like a finite shelf space, and Coca-Cola is like the same that it's always been, but in cannabis, the strains are always changing, and it's just something of the culture. It's almost like a music or a wine type culture where they want to see what the new, craft beer flavor is going to be. But these changes all come with costs. And so it is that balancing act of like, yes, we could have a new strain we drop every month, but what is it? Could you tell us a little bit about your process of picking strains? Like, how do you processize this? Because there is so much of like, oh, it looks cool and the high is enjoyable, plus it's popular, but you can't just always be looking for the new hype strains. So how do you add a process to picking your strain?
Well, it is a really interesting thing, and I'm sure every farm does it differently, but we have this built-in tension, and it's a good tension between the cultivation and the operations side of the business and sales, because the salespeople are the ones boots on the ground, hearing direct feedback from buyers, and buyers tell them what they want today. And so that's what our sales team knows really well. And then our cultivation and operations team, they know what is easy to grow. They know what the yields are. They know how, what the various characteristics of the plant are that makes it maybe easy. Like some strains are harder to root, so maybe we don't want to have that because it's less viable. So there's other specific cultivation and yield metrics that to be included in the conversation. And so it's this natural tension between listening to the market and listening to cultivation and figuring out what's the best for the business. And it's just over time you figure it out. So we have a spreadsheet where we keep track of all of those things. We keep track of yield. We keep track of how easy is it to grow. And then we also have a grading system that the salespeople apply. So if something is a grade A quality flower versus a grade B, so then a natural, the way that works is, let's say a grade B flower yields double what a grade A flower is. So which one do we choose? Do we choose to keep the grade A where it's a better quality flower, but we get less yield? Or do we choose to keep the B where we've got more yield, but less quality? So these are the conversations. These are real. And this is like, so there's this tension, and it's not bad. It's a good, you kind of figure it out and then you move forward.
And it is such an art. It's like that art versus science mentality. It's like what you just explained, like on the finance side, we go to like an A/B analysis, and it's like, all right, we can run this strain. We can cash flow revenue projections of this. We run this strain, cash flow projections of this, because an A bud will have this selling price, B bud, well, this one times the quantity. And then it's also like, how long does it take to grow? Some cycles are 8 weeks versus 12 weeks. Well, it's like that drastically impacts how many harvests we can have. And so, yeah, it's more of an art than a science, but you figure it out over time. And that's, again, why that like the soft skills of having a team that's aligned with like the culture and the brand and like what are we doing is important. Because I would argue you can have different successful business models if you're just purely like quantity commercial cultivation that's going to do huge numbers. You can do that successfully and properly, but you have to stick to like the fundamentals. And if you're going to go like craft and more high end and indoor or just craft in general, it's like, all right, you're going to have smaller batches but more profit, and so you got to like always balance that out. And that's where it's not, I like the term you use where it's like built-in tension between like the art form of cannabis cultivation and where it comes from, and then the tension of the new, which is going to be commercialization of specific brands in specific areas. So when you get your brand in California, whether you get it in there, New York, it's like the same pre-roll every single time. We're obviously not there yet because of like a plethora of federal illegalization or illegalities, but that's where it's going. It's always going to be a balancing act. We saw it in beer happen. I'm from Milwaukee, so it's like I saw huge beer commercial operations where it's like they're global, and then within the last 10 years, craft beer has pretty much taken over. So now there's craft, much smaller to medium-sized craft breweries. So it will continue.
Yeah. Well, and the other factor that makes cannabis even more complicated on the cultivation side is that it really is a long process. So let's say that you and I sat down today and had a meeting and said, we want to grow this strain. Well, the soonest it's ever going to hit the market, assuming everything goes well and everything's all queued up properly, the soonest is 6 months from now. Yeah. So it's kind of like driving an aircraft carrier, which I don't know how to do, but you imagine you're slowly going to turn. So you slowly turn, and it takes a long time to realign. And so philosophically, I'm not a huge fan of trying to chase the market, because then you're always behind. So fine, but that's also the real-time feedback that our sales team is getting from the shops as they hear what's happening today. And the challenge for us is to figure out what people are going to want 6 months from now, a year from now, so that we're not playing catch up. We're actually creating the market. And, sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, but we always have to be thinking that way. So it's part of the philosophy of let's get out of today and let's think about tomorrow and let's think about the future.
I would agree. Because I think of it as just being reactive versus proactive. It's business and in life, it's just a little bit easier to be more proactive, lean towards proactive than just constantly responding or reacting to things. And that growth cycle is real too on the cultivation side. It's like whether it's a strain or getting it to market, I mean, even products, it takes a while. So yeah, it's a bit of a risk trying to take innovative products to market, but I always do joke, I'm like, I've given up thinking new products won't continue to be innovated. Like when I was started it, you smoked flower, maybe you used a bowl, then all of a sudden dabbing became a thing. And I remember that was like 10 years ago, like sketch to me. I was like, this seems wrong. And then it's gone from, BHO to just much more better concentrates and extracts. And now they're like use water to make extracts. So I'm like, okay. And it is getting much easier to like indulge in them. Edibles are a lot more logical where they're not like 100 milligrams for 2 bites. You're like, all right, I don't need to worry about really ruining my day. But I do remember at the time, like low bev canna beverages, thinking like that doesn't make sense to me. I don't know who would buy that, but now it's actually totally makes sense. And I can see that like really taking serious market share from like non-alcoholic bevs because it's actually enjoyable instead of just empty calories. I digress. But I love products and I love seeing the innovation.
Yeah, and I do think the social piece of it is really important.
Yes.
The regulations just haven't quite caught up with that. And just last night we were talking about it at home because my daughter poured a glass of wine, so she was drinking wine, and I don't drink. So I was like, well, I still want to have the social impact of having, the whole social drinking together thing without the alcohol. Yeah. So I made myself a little seltzer. We make our syrup. So I put a little syrup in there, a little bit of lemon. And I was like, okay, I have my own mocktail that is not an excuse for a drink. It's an actual real drink.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, it's not an excuse for a drink. It's a real drink. And man, yeah, I experienced that just this summer in Michigan. It's like we were drinking beer at a cannabis event, and then there was some Cannabis, and I'm like, I don't want to keep drinking beer, but I don't want to like end a social interaction. So I switched to Cannabis, had a great time. they actually taste phenomenal. Like some of the seltzers just taste horrible. And so
Mhm.
like not having to have alcohol in it, I think makes them a little bit more palatable. So that will definitely continue. And I think, yeah, they are. I like even like the infused dinners for like the social aspect of cannabis. Like it used to just be like blunt circles and joint circles, or you a circle of friends smoking cannabis. And now there's
Yep.
you can have a whole evening of enjoying cannabis. So yeah, it'll be enjoyable to see that. And just keep going down that. Like, what about, do you have any intentions of getting into other verticals? Just thinking through like more of these license types, like consumption lounges is what came to mind right away. Do they do consumption lounges in Oregon, or is that not a
They
thing?
sadly do not. Oregon, I think, is caught up in the fact that it was one of the first states to legalize rec. And so the majority of the rules that we're constrained by today were all developed while the Cole Memorandum was in effect. So they're
Okay.
highly restrictive, and they're about safeguarding the state. They're not about actually promoting the business. And the Oregon Secretary of State actually did an audit earlier this year exactly on the cannabis rule structure in Oregon, and said that the rules should be loosened and should be more reflective of the current market, because we don't have to worry about the Cole Memorandum anymore. We can, like, legalize cannabis is a whole industry, and Oregon's rules have not caught up. So sadly, Oregon is not a place, we're getting left behind.
That's
Sadly, yeah.
wild, but it makes sense. Like counterintuitively, you would think, having been one of the older, rec markets, they would be at the forefront of new legislation. But just knowing governments and how it works, it's actually like these new states like Minnesota and Ohio who are able to look back at the other 20 plus rec states and then write their laws accordingly.
Mhm.
It is interesting. And government just moves slow. So it doesn't surprise me that they're still like living off these, policies that they made that, to your point, there was so much fear. It was just about protecting the state, where it's like to the detriment of the actual operators.
Right.
Which, as we all know, it's like the operators, especially on the cultivation, are like the backbone of the industry. Like if you don't have any plants, there's no, tax revenue for the state. So I do like to see these new states. I like to think every state's changing, but they're doing it in earnest to improve the laws and regulations and make it more equitable for everybody, more profitable for everybody. They don't always get it 100% right. I don't think anybody ever gets it 100% right, but it's their intentions that matter. So I'm pretty excited to see kind of more states come online, because we only have less than 25 adult use markets. So like, just in theory, of the 50 states, we're not even really halfway through the American market yet of like adult use. So be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Yep.
Um, Moving on. So I know another aspect of you, which makes you interesting, Marianne, is you're involved on, you come from an accounting and finance background. And so you're also involved in the investing side of cannabis, the capital side of cannabis. Can you tell me a little bit about just your involvement on that, with the fund, and then also what you've experienced to date? And then we can kind of dive into the capital side of cannabis.
Yeah, for sure. So it was really interesting when I founded my business back in 2016. There was this big push that we saw for the first couple years of basically saying that you're not a legitimate business unless you've gone through a capital raise. And I
Yeah.
pushed back pretty hard on that for my own business, because raising capital is certainly appropriate for some businesses, but for other businesses, it's not the right move, and it just ends up tying you to a set of expectations that may not have your business best interest at heart. And so I think it's really important when we talk about capital that it is totally fine and completely acceptable to have a small business that is, sometimes people call it a lifestyle business in air quotes as a derogatory term. But to me,
Yeah.
that's the American dream. Is you have an idea, you build it, it supports your family, it supports your employees, and like that there's some joy in that, and it's real and it's legitimate. We don't all have to own the world and be some multi-billion conglomerate. It's having these small businesses, it really is the heartblood of America. So
And it is like, I would argue like a social media thing, even in the last 10, 15 years, where it used to be cool to bootstrap a business to success. It's like, yeah, dude, we have a team, we're profitable, everyone's paid. It's sweet. I don't
yep.
owe anybody anything. And then we went through this weird phase where 100%, where it's like, unless you raise capital, you almost didn't treat it like a real business. And I saw this even with my entrepreneur friends outside of cannabis. And like, it was the weirdest thing to me, where but now I do kind of get it. And I would argue that bootstrapping is becoming cool again, maybe just because it has to be. And it's like, you don't need to go get outside capital. You could just form a team of 3 individuals and have like somebody be the cannabis guy, somebody be the real estate guy, somebody be the money guy, self-fund your business that way. And if you have all of those 3 in yourself, do it yourself. But no, I agree. Not all money is good money. And I'm happy to see cannabis return more to like traditional business where it's like, yeah, you may need to take on some debt or give up some equity to raise capital for a specific expansion or a specific reason. But if you can't point to that, like very, very clearly, we have seen a lot of companies take on a lot of debt, and then we're starting to see some go into receivership. And so it's a real thing where like, once you start giving up pieces of your company, you have to be careful because it very quickly can become not your company. We unfortunately watched that happen with the brothers who's founded Dutchie. It's, over the years, they got kicked out, and it's like, yeah, that's how real business is done. So you're dealing with sharks when you start bringing in these various aspects of debt and capital. But on that note, so you have a fund that invests in cannabis. You're a part of the due diligence process. What are just some red flags that you encounter on the due diligence process of some deals that come your way?
Yeah, so I'm a member of a fund. It's a member managed fund, which is really unusual. And so there's maybe, I don't know how many LPs there are, maybe 30 or 50, 30 or 40. And some people participate more than others, but we have formed a due diligence team to look at investments. And it's really interesting over time, learning from people who have been investing their entire life. I've gotten to see what questions they ask, how they judge companies, and how they evaluate which companies make, are potential for good investments. And 9 times out of 10, if something doesn't work, it's because of the team. So figuring out how to, like, what makes a successful team and how to figure that out from a pitch deck and from talking to people, it's really interesting. Some people are really good at just honing in on specific questions that need to be asked and finding the gaps. So, specific examples of what I mean by the team is having enough experience to know that the market can go up and down. So I can't tell you how many budgets and pro formas I've seen where they're saying, oh, the price of flower is going to be $3,000 a pound, and we're going to be cash flow positive in 6 months. And then when you look at that, and you're like, well, have you projected what cash flow is going to look like when the price of flower drops? I'm like, well, no, it's 3,000. It's always going to be 3,000. Like clearly you haven't studied the market. You clearly have no understanding of what actually happens when you look at when states legalize. There's the ups and the downs, and the ups and the downs that are fairly consistent and fairly predictable. And so having that tolerance built into your model of knowing that you could flex by 50% up and down, and what is the business going to do? How's that going to impact your business? How's that going to impact what you spend, what you choose to invest in? Really understanding what the numbers do and what they mean from a strategy perspective.
Man, I appreciate that insight. It validates a lot of the stuff that we do on the finance side, because the product is important, and the team, and that's what it is. Like, the team makes the product. The team sets the financial strategy of the company. The team is the one who follows up on sales and back office. And so, yeah, if you don't have a team in place that's like knowledgeable of all that stuff, or at least experienced enough to see it coming, yeah, I can see that being a big red flag, because the prices will fluctuate. We see it a lot as well, where it's like we make they just make it with a static price for all 5 years, and it's like you need to factor in not only the the average case scenario, but like especially the last 2 years, like how low can you go before you start going the opposite direction, and like having that like knowledge in the plan of like, hey, we're going to sell at this price, we're good, but the market can tank all the way down to here and we're still not going out of business. We'll be able to get through that tough period and ride the upside back into normalcy, or the the average. Like, you need to have that worked into your business plan, because to your point, it's an exciting industry, it's a fun industry, but it's still a business, and it needs to be treated as such. So that's really interesting. What are some like green flags, or I guess like what are some things that make an investment attractive? And I know most investors kind of come at it from like either a debt or an equity perspective, or pre-revenue or post-revenue, but what would you say are some some things that are like good attributes of a team where the investors be like, all right, cool, that seems like a viable team to get behind?
I would say demonstrated operational excellence. And so being able to run a successful business is not easy. And then, as you said, you layer on cannabis on top of that, it even makes it more complex. And so you can't just go into this as a first-time founder, or never having run a team or never having run anything, and expect to be successful. You really have to be able to figure out what the key points and what the key inflection points are in your business, and be able to adapt. And so I think part of that is just the experience, but then also it's understanding that the flexibility that comes over time. So, like we were just talking about, the market changes, both the prices and the products change. So if you can't stay up on what the latest things are, then you're going to be left behind. So let's just say you have the really cool idea to make Raymond's best brownies ever. And so you're going to have a kitchen, you're going to, source some products, you're going to make some brownies. But then let's just say all of a sudden the market shifts and we've learned that chocolate has lead in it. So we can't source chocolate anymore. What are you going to do? Your whole business is focused on this one supply chain problem. So you have to learn how to pivot and how to think ahead and strategize. Well, what do I do in that scenario? So it's kind of these things that come by experience. And I think, like we were talking initially, the soft skills of being able to adapt and learn and not be stuck in your ways, always be thinking and questioning, how can I get better? How can my team get better? How can my products get better? I think those are the keys.
Okay, nice. And I just have to ask, I don't know if you have the answer, but a common person that I run into often is a team of people. They've won a license. They may even have the real estate secured, but they are pre-revenue. How would you give any advice to any of those founders out there and teams? I know there's a lot of those teams out there on the East Coast now where they've won a license, they may have even identified the real estate, and they're going through the capital raise process. But as we know, for pre-revenue companies, especially pre-revenue companies without fixed assets or out assets, like, it's tough. You got to be very strategic and very consistent with your efforts. So do you have any advice for people out there that have the license and may or may not have the real estate, but they're in that capital raise process? How would you, advise them to move forward?
I would say you've got to double your budget and double the amount of time that you think it's going to take. Build that into your model. And if everything still looks good, go for it. I think that having the excitement and the energy from the East Coast and these new markets is really energizing. So it's fun seeing people excited about entering the cannabis business. Those of us on the West Coast who've been through it for a minute, a lot of us have lost that excitement. So it's,
I would say it borders on feeling jaded.
Yes. So, every week I hear somebody else in the Oregon space who is either letting their license go or selling or wanting to sell. They're just done. And so if we can take that as a learning, a knowledge, and say, well, what have we learned here on these more mature markets, and how can we help then the newer markets be successful? I think it's really adding in the risk tolerance to your model. So like I said, double your budget, double the amount of time you think it's going to get to be operational. And if everything else still looks good, then absolutely go for it.
Awesome. Thank you. Moving on kind of just to the running the business again, thinking through the supply chain and tech stack issues of running a cannabis company. You're more on the cultivation side, so you have your own set of issues, but just thinking through the supply chain, have you had any supply chain issues on the cultivation side, and kind of how do you, adapt them and overcome them?
We have over time, during COVID especially, there were a lot of ingredients and materials that we needed that we couldn't get timely. So it's like everything, you've just got to find an option and adapt. One example is that we were building out one of our newer rooms right at the beginning of COVID, and we needed to buy some lights. Our previous manufacturer was back ordered by, 6 months or something. So we had to pick a new manufacturer, which is not ideal. It's not what I would have chosen, because now we have 2 separate systems, and actually we have 3 now, but different types of lights, manufacturer, different warranties, all kinds of differences. But it's what we had to do is way more important for us to be operational and get them in timely rather than waiting for the perfect solution. So I think applying that mentality to lots of decisions is important. Is it more important for it to be right and for it to be perfect, or is it more important to get it going now? And there's not one right answer, but at least in the conversation, you got to think about it.
And that's why, again, like having that team where everybody's aligned on the goals and what we're trying to accomplish in this time frame. Because there's so many variabilities, to cultivating, like, using even different lights, and then the depreciation schedules are different and the prices and everything. And they're okay, nice. And then what about from the tech stack? Just, we all know about the pains of cannabis, just being that it's a small company or a startup industry that's federally illegal. We don't have a lot of traditional, just very large ERPs that are, like Oracle and SAP. So it's usually a hodgepodge of softwares. From the finance side, we usually have like an accounting trial balance software, sales software, POS, purchasing software, inventory software. There's usually some seed to sale compliance software, and the list goes on. Yep. So in your experience, kind of what were some challenges you found picking out your tech stack? And then now that you have one set up, what do you like about it? And what are just some ongoing things that are just always going to be an issue?
Well, one of the interesting decisions that actually we're still going back and forth as a team trying to figure out what the right answer is there's, on the cultivation side, there is a ton of software options that help you manage your cultivation and help you keep track of all the data. We can track, there are so many data points that we could track when you do crop steering, which is a whole way of growing, where it's a data-driven methodology to determine how much you feed and when you feed and all of that. So there's a lot of data points, and we have to figure out, is it more important to like save and have a repository for all the data points, or do we really just want to keep track of a few of the most important ones? It's one of these things of, do we want all the data that may not be important, or do we just want to choose a few? And we chose to just have a few. So I think it's easy to fall into the trap of analysis by paralysis, or paralysis by analysis, where you have too much data, and then you end up managing the data as opposed to managing the business. And so we chose specifically to be lean in terms of what data we want to track, because we don't have extra staff time to be keeping track of databases and entering things. So we had to choose what are the key things that we want to keep track of, and then just do that. So on the cultivation side, that's what we've done. More on the business side, we certainly have, accounting, and we actually use the same accounting package that we use for all of our sales and ordering and all of that. That's all one piece. But in terms of tech stack, the thing where we've chosen to invest is, I've chosen to invest in a store locator, which was kind of expensive, but it was a common problem that we had talking to our customers. So we work really hard at building the brand. So we'll go as a brand and set up at a music event or a party or some event, and people would come up and we would hand them stickers and tell them about our brand. They'd say, well, where can I find your products? And it's such a simple question, and yet it's not.
Yeah, not in cannabis. It's like, normally like, go to the website, just place your order there. It's like, it's kind of works, but not really in cannabis.
Yeah, okay. And our retailers that we sell to, some of them use Dutchie, some of them use Weedmap, some of them use, there's so many retail solutions that we couldn't, and they all have different refresh rates. So just because a retailer says that they have our pre-rolls in stock at their store on Belmont doesn't actually mean that they're in stock and on the shelf. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out, because from a brand perspective, being able to give your customer accurate information about where they can buy your products is so important. And it's so oddly challenging. So we invested in a tool that actually does this. They go and scrape real-time data and accumulate, and that's what we use for our store locator. But for a long time, we were doing it manually. So every 6 months, we would just go through and enter in all the people that we had sold to, and you do a Google map and it's fine. But over time, you have to become more efficient and you have to be process driven, and that's not sustainable. So choosing to invest in adding a tool for our customers, for us, was the right choice. Because I think that as a brand being, customer facing, you have to do that. If they have a bad experience and they can't find your products, well, you've already lost a customer.
Right. Doesn't matter how much they like it, because it's easy to make a sale once, but we're all in the business of making repeat sales. So no, I totally hear you on that, and that is interesting too. Of just like you had said, like things in cannabis are just oddly difficult. Where it's like cannabis or business in general, like we're saying it. I think this SBA, the statistic is like 9 out of 10 small businesses are out of business within 5 years. It's a little bit harder in cannabis. So it's that hard plus some. Where simple things of having people be able to find your product, you need to find a very specific solution. And so that's kind of always interesting, and just add it to the list as well. And it's interesting too, like the KPI side of like the tech stack and the data points, like you had mentioned, we go through this all the time in finance, as well as like there's endless data points, financial data points that you can look at for your business. But understanding the most important ones, which realistically it's no more than 3 to 5 usually. There's other like secondary KPIs that may influence these main KPIs, but it's really these main ones that matter. And to your point, a cultivation KPIs are going to be slightly different than retail. And so finding a software that allows you to capture them in a relatively easy manner, so it's not a big manual lift every 2 weeks or every month where we got to go manually gather all the data, update these dashboards. That's kind of the game that we play, because you do need these metrics. Like that's how we like proactively run the business forward. It's like if you don't have metrics because the metric is just a goal, usually is like, hey, this number is the goal, so we either hit it, great, let's do more of that, which made us hit it, or we didn't, so what can we fix? And like getting to that point is like so imperative in business, and takes some time, and it's not easy to get there, but that's really where you want to get the business to, is where it's a proactive business that is like has forecasts and guiding principles and systems, like you were saying, instead of just reacting to the world, trying to make sales and fulfill on sales. Kind of on that note, kind of last question here. I appreciate your time again. But growing as a leader, it's like, I'm sure when you started your business to where you are now, you're not the same person. You've grown immensely, most likely. And so kind of just this ongoing journey of learning and growth. How do you invest in your own leadership capabilities and improving them? And how do you kind of invest in your team's leadership capabilities and improving them?
That's a great question. And it's hard because we are a small team, but in terms of investing and growing and learning, I think it's that attitude of being open and knowing that there's always more to learn, and encouraging that both in myself and in my team. So, like our head of cultivation, we sent her to a science conference because she really wanted to learn more about the science of cannabis, even though she has a bachelor's and a master's in plant pathology. So, I think it's that fostering the desire for knowledge, and then investing in it, actually investing it, not just giving it lip service of saying, oh, we want to get better, but actually, how are we going to do that? And let's demonstrate our commitment to that. The other thing that I've had to learn on a personal level is we've had to make some tough changes in personnel over the years, and being able to recognize and identify problems faster would have been better. I mean, so we had somebody we had to let go, but we kind of knew for an embarrassingly long amount of time that it wasn't working out. We gave plenty of opportunities, plenty of options for learning, plenty of opportunities for improvement, and none of them were taken, and there was no improvement. And it's hard because in cannabis, it's like from a personnel standpoint, it's hard to know, will I be able to replace this person? Because the staffing side of things hasn't quite developed and matured. So let's say you need a new person to run, and I'm just going to make this up, to run your processing lab. Well, how are you going to get that person? And it's not like you can go to and get somebody who's a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in cannabis who has a demonstrated skill. So there's a lot of risk in key staff turnover. And
Yeah.
my mistake, or my learning point, it was like, you've got to be able to make those changes quicker, because one bad person can ruin the whole business. And so being able to recognize it, take action, and not be afraid of it was an important thing for me to learn.
Nice. No, I appreciate your candidness. And yeah, there's always the risk to reward ratio, and sometimes it's just fear holding us back. And so, like, we got to be brave as business owners. I think we all know that, and that's why most business owners and entrepreneurs all respect each other and care for each other, because we know it's like we're all playing a tough game. It's a stressful game, but yeah, the ones that are brave enough to play, it's, we all have each other's respect and stuff. No, really cool. Appreciate you taking the time to speak with me, Marianne, and provide your insight just based on your experience in not only the Oregon market. I have more questions I want to chat with you about, but just to be mindful of time, let's wrap this up. We can table some of my other conversations for a future date. Because I know you are heavily involved in kind of the cannabis business associations of Oregon.
Yep.
And we're seeing these business organizations being created in real time in Minnesota, Ohio. I'm looking to start one in Wisconsin that's actually active and, drives things forward. So till next time, I'd like to kind of touch on all of that, Marianne. But just again, thanks again for giving me your time, and let the people know where they can find you, what Alibi is up to. And I guess we're entering 2024 here, believe it or not. And so what are your plans for 2024?
Yeah, so Alibi, we're pretty easy to find online. Our website is alibicannabis.com. We're on Instagram, Alibi Cannabis. I'm always happy to connect with other professionals in the space on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find there. And our plans for the upcoming year is look for us in other states. So we are working hard at expanding through licensing deals, and hopefully we'll have some products available to more customers who can experience our quality and our sensational products in the new year.
Awesome. And yeah, we'll definitely table that for next time too, is like the new expansion via licensing deals seems sketchy at first, but it's definitely becoming very common in the industry, and honestly one of the best practices. So very excited to see your products in new states and new markets. So thanks again for your time, Marianne, and I'll talk to you soon. Be well.
Thanks, Raymond. Bye.